When I decided to make the transition into sales, I actually got heavy into the interview process with both tech sales and med sales companies. I ultimately chose tech sales, and there's no right answer here, but I wanted to shed light both on my experience in tech sales and med sales interviews and some of the things I learned along the way if you're considering either making the switch from one to the other or deciding which path to go altogether. So a story for another time, but I actually took a year off and I played sports overseas. And one of the reasons I actually looked at medical sales is because very notorious companies like Stryker, Abbott, etc. There's numerous companies that apply, but in particular Stryker, they're very renowned for taking former D1 athletes or very competitive athletes and putting them in their sales program to develop them into a full-time rep. I'm not trying to be braggadocious or anything of that nature, but I applied. I actually had a recruiter reach out to me within like 20 minutes, had my first call same day, and they were trying to push me through the process at the same time that I had interviews going on in the tech world as well. The interesting thing that I found, and I didn't get far enough with other med device companies to know if this is kind of a medical device thing versus tech, but really I got really deep into the interview process, not only with the company itself, but I actually went out of my way to meet and speak with doctors, physicians, etc. to better understand what med device sales was. I found YouTube channels of reps that actually detailed their day-to-day, and I literally, I kid you not, like got to the point where I needed to see if I could actually like withstand. Like if you're selling, for instance, surgical tools, many times you're in the operating room as backup for doctors, for people working with these tools, and you are the expert on how to use the tool effectively. And so I literally was watching like spinal surgeries on YouTube, which exists, to like see if I could stand it. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I was kind of like 50-50 on if I could really do that. I'm not a big fan of looking at bodies like opened up and things like that. But I digress, and before I get too off topic, I would just say that one of the things that I noticed, and this was kind of common with all of the med device companies that I spoke with, were large companies. And they typically are acquiring a bunch of smaller different med device companies that create some technology that's a strategic add to the larger company's portfolio. They acquire that company, and then the reps at, as an example, a Stryker and Abbott are selling that technology to doctors. And one of the things I found, I don't know if it's just med device or just more typical of larger companies, but it was very traditional in the corporate sense of like standard personality. Like I had some great interviews that were more conversational. There was an expectation, if you look online, that like if you didn't wear a suit and tie, even though it was a video interview, you would not progress further. It was kind of like an unwritten rule. There were personality tests. They were trying to sell me on the Rolex Club, and it just like, again, like if that is what gets you going and that excites you, like more power to you. To me, it just kind of felt like a little like kind of I don't know, like a cool club, a little bit cliquey, and not really kind of the laid back, or I shouldn't even say laid back, but like the less structured, more figure it out type of environment that a tech startup provided. And lastly, again, hitting on why I ultimately decided to go more the tech route. As I got further into these interviews, as I spoke with doctors, physicians, etc., I just kind of realized that selling to doctors and physicians, I mean, could I learn it? Could I put in the time and the effort to do it? Yes. But having an engineering background myself, having been an engineer for 3 years, I had a distinct advantage going into tech sales in that I know at a high level how engineers think and operate. I know how to better understand what challenges they're facing and how to map that onto a solution. And again, I certainly had to learn a ton about the products I was selling, no doubt. But I was used to that motion in the past. I had been in customer-facing engineering roles where I was supporting clients using technology, etc. This became very clear the further I got in both directions in the interview process. I was going to have a much stronger advantage out of the gate going the tech route, which was a big decision factor for me. But additionally, again, tech as a whole, it's a little bit less structured. It's much more lateral as a whole, and things are moving so fast. Technology is advancing so rapidly, especially depending on the company that you're working on, that if you're putting in work, if you're putting in a ton of value, your opinion is almost valued as much as anyone in the company. And that's really what I found in my interview process, is I wanted to be at places that were bringing newer products, newer technology to market, and that's where I've been to date. All the companies that I've worked at have been bringing new products to market, and while there's a lot of pros and cons that goes on with it, I like the fact that we just have to figure it out, and there's no structure. I'm not going to come in, and what I felt like with the med device is there's kind of a cadence, there's a way that you speak to doctors and physicians, there's a way that things are done, and it's better for you to follow that script than have to figure it out and kind of have an open-ended agenda that it's on you to solve. But again, I think it's also worth saying, the only folks that I spoke with in the med device world were at these super large conglomerate companies. So maybe that's a side effect of a company just being enormous. I know when I was an engineer, I worked at a large tech company, and it kind of had shades of that, where you've got all these personality assessments, all these written or unwritten rules and expected ways that people communicate, etc. By the way, I might add, if you're in med sales and you agree, disagree with this advice, I would love to get your opinion. But in conclusion, kind of summarizing the differences more on a personal level, tech as a whole tends to be much more lateral, tends to provide opportunities, at least at a minimum, for title advancements and you to take on more responsibility out of your role. The vibe that I got from med sales is that it's a much more structured process. Again, your end user is totally different than tech sales. And even just working into hospital systems, going and selling in person is a totally different motion than tech. And yes, there's people that have made substantial amounts of money on both sides, but I think it's a matter of playing to your personality. Are you okay playing second fiddle to a doctor, to a physician, if you don't have a medical degree or much exposure to that? You have to defer to them as the expert. One of the things I really enjoy about tech sales is that, again, I'm not the technical expert, I'm not writing code, but I can come in and say, hey, as technology is evolving so rapidly, just naturally people, spend 2 to 3 years adopting some sort of technology, and by the time they're fully on it, it's already out of date. So I can come in with a new product, with a new technology, and better understand where they're at right now, and then come in and say, hey, here's where you're at right now. Here's where you're trying to go, and this is exactly how this new technology solves that. And that kind of sales motion is much more exciting to me. It caters to my background being in that tech world, and it was just much more of a fit for my personality. So there's no right answer. And again, I readily admit, I'm not the go-to guy to better understand the full process of med device sales. But it just kind of felt like very, very rigid structure. To their credit, they're very successful at what they do. Whereas tech was much more lateral, much more open-ended, and much more on the individuals, especially in the startup landscape, to just figure it out and kind of make it up on the fly, which was much more appealing to me. So I'm curious, for those of you watching, have any of you considered maybe tech sales or med sales? Are any of you considering maybe making the change if you're already in one or the other? And for those of you that are in med sales, is there anything that you can provide in terms of what the medical sales industry is like? Would love to know, and appreciate everyone's time. So we'll see you next week. Thanks.